explanation is none other than Mr. Udai Singh, President of Global Product and Solution and Learning Delivery at NIIT. Mr. Udai Singh's extensive experience and expertise in the field of educational technology make him the perfect guide for today's journey. With over 4 decades of visionary leadership at NIIT, he has been at the forefront of driving innovation and transformation in the realm of online learning. Under Mr. Udai Singh's leadership, NIIT has consistently pushed the boundaries of what's possible in education, leveraging technology to create dynamic, interactive learning experiences for learners around the globe. From pioneering online learning portals to developing innovative blended education models and the revolutionary Cloud Campus TM, Mr. Udai's contribution to the field are truly unparalleled. And today, he is here with us to share his insights on leveraging generative AI for EdTech. Without further ado, let's give a warm welcome to Mr. Udai Singh.
A pleasure to be here. Of course, being associated with the NIIT University literally from inception as part of my journey with NIIT. So the way I thought about this session is really in 3 parts, just a little bit of interest generation and just to get us aligned in terms of what Gen AI is. And I did have a few videos that I wanted to show, but in the interest of time, I'll skip that and certainly point you to those. And the second part is really, stepping back, because stepping back from the technology, because one of the things that I've realized in my almost 35 years at NIIT, that every few years, we think that the perfect technology has arrived and that's going to solve all the problems associated with learning. Beginning with my first year at NIIT, where I was fortunate enough to, see something which was video laser discs with interactive touch screens. And I'm talking 35 years ago, we needed special permission to import that equipment. At that time, you needed RBI's permission and all that. So it was a really big deal. But it wasn't the technology. It was, I think, the work that happened behind to use that technology that really made the difference. And I remember seeing a learning program that we had created for training irrigation engineers on how to diagnose problems with canals. And the way it was done was that, there was a video shot sitting in an open jeep that is going along, the road that normally is built alongside the canal. And it has that video footage. And the learners were supposed to touch the screen as that video was progressing if they found anything untoward, and then point out what the issue was, and then it would give you feedback whether that was right or wrong. So even though the technology was fancy, it was the innovation in terms of the learning design, which is, and we have a fancy word for that today called immersive learning. But much long before the word immersive learning came, that was an example of how you can immerse the learner in the environment in which they will have to perform. And that is what, a lot of irrigation engineers have to do, which is daura karna padta hai, And your jeep is moving at 30, 50 kilometers an hour, and if you're not smart enough to recognize and tell, the driver to stop and go down and actually inspect what is going wrong, it's not going to work. So working backwards from the environment in which the learning outcome has to be demonstrated is always a good aspect of, making effective learning. And so as I was thinking about this session, I thought I would share with you some of the the research and insights from the field of cognitive science, learning science, behavioral science, that has guided us in our journey of learning design. And about 2-3 years back, we kind of stepped back and said that, as these methodologies were kind of evolving, we incorporated them one by one, and every time we felt that we had pushed the envelope. What would it look like if we were able to put them all together? So some of you mentioned, in terms of an architecture and what would really create a superior learning, experience and outcome. So that's what I have in the third part of my session. And it's in that context that I really feel, that Gen AI fits in. So rather than viewing it as a technology and where can I use it, if we go back to the really hard problems that we've been, struggling with, and what can this technology help us do to address those hard problems, then I think that gives a good framework for the use of it. Of course, there are many aspects of it that can be used intuitively. So, what generative AI is not? I think increasingly those of us who are using tools like ChatGPT or Claude or Gemini, are first of all, it becomes very clear very quickly that this is not a search engine. And in fact, increasingly, I think search engines will need to reinvent themselves. Even as some of you were speaking, I had my conversational bot open so that I could immediately, relate it to what is somebody saying, what's the theory, what is Malcolm Nowell's theory, how does it fit into our learning design? And I could keep pace with your conversation. So it's not a search engine, certainly not a truth machine. Better not believe everything that it spins out. It certainly does not predict the future. So this is, photograph visual that a friend of mine shared. He's a professor at Arizona State University. And this is in response to Gen AI being asked, what is Gen AI? Can you visually depict? So he says, Gen AI is this very interesting lady with funky looking things coming out of the head.
Quite confused.
But this is what actually is behind the scenes. Rows and rows and rows of servers, doing mathematical complex, linear algebra and vector calculations and things like that. And one of the videos I wanted to show you was that, but in the interest of time. Now, of course, this is a big concern because many people are saying, you would have heard articles about how Microsoft's using as much water as a full town or, power and things like that. And there's obviously pressure on these companies to figure out more effective solutions. But one of the things that is driving it is computational power. And, there's of course the whole thing of right now NVIDIA, from being a manufacturer of graphics cards for games, has become, the third most valuable company on planet Earth. And they're in that enviable position where, they can decide, okay, you ordered 10,000, I'll give you 100 of those chips. So it's a very rare situation where a company, is literally allocating quotas of how much chips you can. And that has become a source of competitive advantage. But hopefully...
Employees are asking, if you have those 800 chips, only then I'll join you.
Correct.
How
correct.
much compute power do you have?
The top engineers. So, one of the things I think we have to keep reminding ourselves is that Gen AI has no understanding of what it is spewing out. That understanding is in our heads. What it is the best guessing machine ever created. And what does it guess? Given a string of words, it guesses the most appropriate word that comes after. So if you have an incomplete sentence, which now all of us have kind of figured out is a prompt, and it needn't be incomplete, it can be complete. It builds on that. And actually not even words, but tokens as there. So it's a really, really, really good guessing machine. And because it has literally ingested all of the printed material that has ever been created by mankind, it does a phenomenal job of doing that. But don't think that it actually understands what it is spewing out. So therefore, the question that yes, it's a very powerful tool, but how and where do we put it to use in learning? Certainly at a personal and individual level, we can begin to see that it's a very powerful learning tool. And it's really amazing. At an individual level, even if I have 15, 20 minutes, I just pick a random topic and start a conversation. And it's amazing how, you can go as deep as you want, you can remain shallow, you can go sideways. But unlike search engines, which respond with a whole lot of links, and then you've got to go into each one of those links and figure out, is it useful, not useful? So there's a lot of wasted time. But here, even 15-minute session can be very productive. So which begs the question, is that only going to be the way to learn in the future? And right now we're talking about conversations, which are mostly text. And we're using the keyboard. And the next step obviously is going to be voice. There are already previews of videos getting generated. So imagine a whole multimedia conversation going on in which the content is getting generated on the fly. Why would we need, teachers or facilitators anymore? So that's the kind of extreme situation which we can begin to contemplate. We're not quite there yet. But everyone who's been working with Gen AI has been surprised at the speed at which some things that were being spoken of are getting announced or launched, or betas or pilots are going on. We've all, over the last couple of weeks, been reading about Devin, the software engineer, and Devika, in response to that, another software engineer. These are very early attempts, but they'll only get better. So this is the background with which then I said, okay, let's step back and review some of the things that we have learned about learning. And of course, caution over here is that learning science is still a very new subject. A lot of the research that has happened has literally happened in the last 30, 40, 50 years and evolving, and partly because our own understanding of the brain is increasing. But one basic fundamental is you can have no learning without long-term memory creation. Does everybody agree to that? Because if you can't retrieve something from your brain, there's no evidence that learning has happened. So learning means, or learning requires, retrieving from the brain either knowledge, which is essentially concepts stored in memory, or procedures, which is how to apply knowledge to produce an observable action. So what the definition, somebody spoke about skill. What is skill? The capacity to perform an observable action. I can sit on my armchair and hypothesize, and I may have all the knowledge, sitting in my head. I can retrieve it, but that is not equal to a skill. So skill requires you to perform an action and be able to demonstrate that knowledge in action. So knowledge and skill hand in hand, but two distinct things. And then on that we build competencies, which is the ability to do tasks which may involve knowledge about multiple concepts and the ability to take multiple actions. And let me use a very simple example over here. If I asked you, while hiring a driver, would you like to hire a competent driver? Everyone would say yes, obviously. It's a matter of life and death. So what the hell does competent driver mean? Well, basic steering skills, ability to apply the brakes, accelerate, and so on and so forth. So that's one competency. Should the driver be able to do basic repair and maintenance? If you have a flat tire, should he be able to change the tire? If the red engine oil sign comes up, should he be able to open up the bonnet? Maybe yes, or at least have the knowledge to call up the 1-800 number to get. Should he be able to navigate? Should he be able to use Google Maps? So you can see that our definition of a competent driver has evolved over a period of time. What about a driver who's driving for Indian Oil and carrying petroleum or hazardous material? Do you think they should have some additional knowledge of how to, cordon off an area in case there is a spill, set out a fire, and so on and so forth? So the definition of a competent driver for Indian Oil will be different from a competent driver, who's ferrying you to office and back. And we say somebody is competent if they're able to do the tasks that are required to demonstrate competency in that area. And a collection of competencies defines that role. But it goes beyond that. It also includes attitude, it also includes experience. So knowledge that you must stop at the red light is a knowledge about the traffic rules. But somebody who jumps the red lights, it's not a lack of knowledge that is the issue. It's an attitudinal problem. So would you say a driver who jumps red lights is a competent driver? It's a tricky one. He may have excellent hand-eye coordination. And if somebody, if there's a collision, he may even brake in time. But you really would not classify that person as a competent driver. So attitude makes a difference. What about going to the hills or Shimla in this, winter season and you hit a snowy road? Or knowledge that, if there is a bridge in the winter, the cold air current going under the bridge might cause black ice to develop on the bridge and your car might skid. You can't see that black ice. Where will that come from? That comes from experience. So the whole thing about competency is knowledge, skills, attitude, experience. It's like you expect your airline pilot, to have flown for a few thousand hours, and nobody wants to sit in a plane where, the pilot has just come out of the flying academy. And certainly he won't be the pilot, he'll probably be the co-pilot. So let's look at some of the things that, insights that have been gathered over a period of time. And this is 19th century, so this is over 100 years old. But the essence of this, Ebbinghaus, researcher, German, basically saying that the way the human memory works is that information that is given, including my session today, you'll have a hard time remembering, most of the things that I said tomorrow, unless you have further opportunities to review the material, read it on your own, internalize it, but most, appropriate would be if you get an opportunity to apply it or practice it. So there's a pretty rapid forgetting curve, and therefore the teacher may have done a great job of teaching, but that doesn't translate into learning. A Russian scientist and philosopher whose work, came out only after, in many ways, his death. But the whole area of something called proximal development. What basically this refers to is that there is a zone between what people know already and what they don't know. But if there was somebody to help them or assist them, they can learn. But they would have a very tough time doing it on their own. If what you are trying to communicate is stuff that they know, they'll lose interest. If it's so far away from what they know, they'll just give up. So what is that little stretch that you can create, which is the zone of proximity or proximal development? And one aspect of good learning design is to make sure that you start with something that people know or can relate with, their past knowledge, and then you progressively take them forward with enough stretch to engage and interest them and challenge them, but not so much that they give up. And this requires, again, experience and calibration, but it's one way of ensuring that the learners stay motivated and they're heading towards the right hand. Yeah. It's like, have you ever played a game where you just lose interest? Correct. And games are often referred to as the ultimate, learning tools, because have you noticed that games barely have any instructions anymore? At best, they'll give you a guided play for the level 1, and then, you're on your own. And it's interesting enough that even if you fail 5, 7, 10 times in that level 2, you'll keep trying it until you crack it, and then you get on to level 3, and then again you collapse the first time you try it, and so on. And you look back a few years down the line and say, oh my God, how could I ever have got stuck at level 1? But for the level of experience that you had at that stage, that was challenging enough. So it progressively unfurls challenges. And there are games that have been keeping people engaged, for years. I play a game called Star Trek Fleet Command, which I've been playing for 6 years. And it just, you can even play it for 5 minutes a day or whatever. But there's something new happening which keeps you interested. Scaffolding theory. An American professor at Harvard, building on some of the things from the previous, saying that people need assistance in the beginning, but the level of assistance that you provide can be progressively reduced. Because if the assistance continues for too long, then they become dependent and you'll never come to know, they can manage without it. Just like learning bicycles, you have those 2 additional wheels at the beginning, and then one fine day, they become an irritation because you can't turn very easily if those wheels are still there. And sometimes it's just required for 2 or 3 days. Or when you're learning swimming and you're wearing a life jacket, but then you realize, very quickly that under the arms, the skin gets chaffed and starts burning, and then you throw them out and say, I'm going to learn swimming without it. But the scaffolding is necessary to provide a safe environment that addresses some of the fears and concerns that anyone has regarding, dealing with a change. And learning requires dealing with a change. It requires acknowledging that I don't know something that I want to know, and then, making the effort to learn. And as they acquire a critical mass of knowledge and skills, you can reduce the scaffolding. Flow. So this is a Czech scientist, Mihai Csikszentmihalyi. Okay, you can go onto YouTube and there are things on how to pronounce his name. But basically the concept that he uncovered was this concept of flow, which is a zone that people get into when they're really involved in a problem or a situation that they want to address, they want to overcome. And it's like time comes to a stop and you don't realize, oh my God, we've been in this workshop for 4 hours, didn't even realize how time flew up. That's because the brain is fully engaged and it becomes very productive. And one of the things for learning designers is, this is the holy grail, that can I get my learner in a state of mind that resembles flow? Because then they will go beyond what I'm trying to learn, help them learn. Correct? I only designed a project exercise and I'm hoping that they spend an hour. But if it excites them enough that they'll burn the midnight oil, my job is done. Correct? So can we get them in this zone of flow? This one is really important and something as an engineer from BITS Pilani that I just didn't get for a long, long time. Until one of my colleagues, literally hours and hours of discussion. And he would keep reminding me, Udai, you're trying to design a program for people like you. But your learners are not like that. They're different. And so the important part of this research, and please, explore this if you haven't, this whole concept of self-efficacy. It's the belief that people build up about themselves over extended periods of time, reinforced by their social environment, about what they can and cannot do. And like Raji said, our educational experiences in school and college, sometimes are guilty of doing that. And what it essentially means is that people see something and they just say, I can't do it. No can do. How do you get a learner who's in that state of mind? You may have designed the best program, but the learner's belief in their own ability is so low. I can't do math. Oh, this has this subject area. I hate this subject. So those barriers come in the way of progress. And which is why we believe that, learning is also a transformational experience. Many of the learners, for the situation that you are creating a learning experience, need a dose of self-belief to be created. They need some wins. And therefore, how do you design the learning experience to restore their own self-confidence? Now, we break this into two parts. One of you mentioned that how do we even get them to start? And so that's the counseling process, the conversational process. What is your end objective? Why is that objective important to you? What has prevented you from achieving that objective? What are the barriers that you identify? What help do you need? How do you think this journey will look like? What could be, constraints or issues, etc. And by having those conversations, we can get learners into a frame of mind where they are ready to commence the journey. And we think of learning as a journey. There's a start point, there's an end point. It's good to have visibility. It's like a trek up a hill. You know where you're going to end up and what the view from there might look like. Correct? That's part of the excitement. Saying, okay, if I get up to that point, I can take these beautiful photographs. I can, share it with everyone, etc. So that creates the motivation. But it also, you need to understand, okay, there'll be portions which are going to be tough climbing, or this journey can't be done in one day. We're going to camp at the end of day 1 here, day 2 there, and so on. Acclimatization. So all of those conversations are important into the, and I use the term enrollment process as different from terms that we may use. A student has registered for our program. Okay, that's the mechanical bit. They've paid the money, they've decided the program, the batch, the timing, and all the logistics. But have they truly enrolled for the program? Remember that you can't unilaterally teach someone. Right? You can facilitate the learning process, but you can't acquire skills on behalf of someone else. The skills have to be acquired by that person. Unlike that scene in the Matrix movie where he's running towards the helicopter and somebody asks him, do you know how to fly it? He said, no, download the program. And by the time he reaches the helicopter, the program has been downloaded, and lo and behold, he's able to fly off. Elon Musk with his neural link is probably, is the first steps towards something like that, but very far away. So until then, it's very important, therefore, to have an honest conversation in terms of what the learning journey is going to look like, what will be the learner's role in it, what is the facilitator's role, what are the resources available, what will be the challenges, what happens when there are moments of despair, what is the safety net that is getting created to help those, how can people help each other, so there are many things that you can create in that ecosystem to ensure that no one gets left behind. But one aspect of that is granular milestones that create moments of achievement. Okay, we've got a 10,000 foot journey, but at 500 meters, we can look back and say, okay, this much distance covered, 9,500 meters to go. So what is the equivalent of progress that we can communicate with our learners and make people feel good about it? Now, this is very interesting. And I think one of the reasons why there has been so much controversy about MOOCs and video-based learning. And this is research. I think this article was published in the HBR, but professors at the University of Chicago. So just read this, it's very interesting. The more people merely watch others perform without actually practicing themselves, the more they believe they could perform the skill too. In one of our conferences, we had Jonty Rhodes come, and obviously there was a conversation with him, and how often with just one stump visible he would manage to hit it. Right? And then he shared, how many hours of practice it takes. 6 hours of practice on the field from all different angles so that he became good at it. Maybe thousands of attempts at. But when he does it on the field, it looks so effortless that people think this is the way every fielder is supposed to. This is cricket. I mean, you should be able to hit the ball. What's the wicket with one stump visible? And if you sit on your couch and watch enough matches, then that's, obviously when I get down, I'll also do the same. But this is a reinforcement of our cognitive mechanism, that we forget that the guy who's demonstrating is an expert, and the effort that has gone behind he or her becoming an expert, because it seems so natural. I had another video which is like a 60-second recipe of a strawberry cheesecake, and that video makes it look so simple, so simple. I said, what can go wrong, with that? And then you realize there are about 20 steps, and the novice is going to make a mistake with every one of those 20 steps. And that 1 minute video will become a 1 hour long exercise over multiple attempts to make a cheesecake before an edible one will come out. But it's just so deceptively simple. And therefore, as designers who are promising learning outcomes, we have to be very careful about what learners take away from watching experts in action, and whether they'll truly be able to replicate that, and are we creating opportunities for them. This is great as a sense of excitement, motivation, and say, wow, I want to learn how to do this. But there's going to be despair when they attempt it. So some of the things that we have learned over the years, I've just tried to sort of distill it over here. Why do people want to learn? Because they want to do something, correct? For some, it may be recreational. I want to learn how to drive a car so that I can go and visit places. For some, it may be, livelihood. I want to learn how to drive because, I want to become a driver for Ola, Uber, or whatever. So it's livelihood. So effective learning leading to high performance is the route to the future that people and organizations aspire for. So there's a sense of purpose over there. Learning solutions must take accountability for delivering better outcomes. It's not enough to say, I did a great job of learning and, 5 on 5, whatever, feedback, and hopefully you've learned. So that's the teacher's supply side view of it versus what the learner intended to do. The way driving schools are run until Maruti created their driving schools, would you even dare to sit in somebody who's been through those 10 rounds that a typical driving school gives? That was the one thing I decided I would teach my children. Correct? The first 1,000 kilometers, I sat with them until I was confident enough to let them, drive on their own. So that's the kind of effort that it took. Fortunately, it was COVID, so the roads were empty, and I found a perfect pentagon, about 3 kilometers, so I could make them drive first right side, then left side, then all kinds of things before I let him onto the main road. And which is why I feel so confident, that if he's taking his grandparents for a drive and then my mother calls, he's a really cautious driver. And he drives well. So even, and if you think about it, India has the highest mortality rate, if an army said that it was losing 50,000 people each year on the battlefield, the government would fall. We lose more than 50,000 people on the roads every year. And there's just one simple thing that can fix it. Of course, good training, but it's also attitude. And there's law enforcement. And at least Maruti's taken the effort to create the Maruti driving schools because it's such a problem for the country. And superior instructional design and use of appropriate technology can significantly, improve the quality of training. So I like to put it very simply. Can we create a learning experience that is better, faster, cheaper? So for all of you, if whatever learning solution that you're creating, if you can't pinpoint how is my learner going to learn better than anyone else they can go to, how can they learn faster than any place else they can go to, because time is the one thing that we're always short of. And of course, who doesn't want a cheaper solution? And remember, who's your competitor? Your competitor is ChatGPT for a motivated learner. And that's, better and better versions of that are going to become free. So on the right are some insights. Of course, given enough time and effort, anyone can learn. But the more important one that I want to just call out is this whole thing around mistakes. That mistakes create opportunities for learning. And how do you create an environment and design in which people actually have the opportunity? In fact, you almost engineer the fact that they make mistakes. Why? When you make mistakes, you feel pain. Correct? I can tell you not to run on the road in your slippers, and you won't listen to me. You fall down, you hurt your knees, they bleed, You feel the pain, you'll remember it for the rest of your life. Why is this important? Because research has shown that memories somehow get strengthened if they are reinforced by emotions. So if your learning experience can release emotions, pain, pleasure, whatever, camaraderie, then people are likely to remember. The memory gets reinforced. You can read about it. There's something called the amygdala in the brainstem. And one of the things that scientists have figured out is that the amygdala plays a role in how memory is organized and how strong the neural connections are because of the other emotions and information that is stored along with it. So you remember your birthday celebrations because your loved ones are with you, it's a nice place, the atmosphere is nice, the music is good, the food was good. Do you remember driving home every day? Not really. In fact, there are some times when you realize, what the hell happened? 1 hour ago I was in Gurgaon, and for me I'm in Noida. You don't remember a thing because it's irrelevant. But if suddenly somebody swerved in front of you and you screamed and applied the brakes, that part will remain. And God forbid, if you ever had an accident, I don't know, your memory will be in slow motion. You'll be able to replay it till the time the impact happened. That's how strong it gets created. And then there's a point that I want to call out, something called deliberate practice, a term coined by a researcher called Anders Ericsson. We've all heard the saying, practice makes one perfect. He has a different take on it, which is what you practice is important. Because if you practice what you already know, that's not time well spent. If you practice to correct your mistakes, then that's going to improve your performance. So if a batsman is getting caught in the slips because he can't recognize that it's an outswinger, there could be a knowledge issue. He's not able to recognize the bowler's action and therefore figure out is the ball going to, or which side the ball is shining, and therefore will it be an outswinger or in-swinger. So the coach will have to, create some video footage and explain to the batsman how to recognize, from the bowler's action whether it's going to be in-swing or outswing. That's knowledge. However, he still has to have the ability to play the stroke in such a way that either he's defending, letting the ball go, or he's actually hitting the ball. That requires practice in the nets. So the coach is going to set up the practice by having 2 or 3 fast bowlers and telling them that I want you to bowl 100 balls today at this guy with a mix of in-swingers and outswingers until he gets it right. Right? Or somebody is getting caught at the boundary line because he doesn't know how to duck and hook properly and things like that. That's deliberate practice. Now, why is deliberate practice hard to do? We know it works. Why is it hard to do?
Context and feedback, it's expert coach.
Who's going to figure out that you're making a mistake? Of course, you can figure out because you got caught. But diagnosing the problem, is it inability to read the bowler's action? Is it a flaw in the technique? Is it the way you're holding the bat? That requires the expert eyes of a coach to diagnose the problem before the practice can be set up. Why do you think Roger Federer has a coach? Why do you think Rafael Nadal has a coach? Why do you think the Olympic team has a coach? They're already good. Why do they need a coach? Because high performance requires that kind of. So our problem is that when we design learning solutions, we are under-configuring them for observation. We're giving the learner things to do, but we're not really observing how they're doing it. Are they even doing it themselves? Is the work copied? So where will the learning take place? We're going through the motions. So this is something that is very, very crucial and can lead to significant benefits. So let me then jump to, I'm going to skip a few slides, and this was an example of how deliberate practice. Very interesting comment saying if you want someone to become a good driver, the issue is not having him drive in circles, but giving him a job which requires repeated driving in a non-artificial way, because then he'll be motivated. Correct. Obviously, before he starts, he has to reach a certain basic level, but he'll improve over a period of time because he's practicing in real life situations and dealing with them. And that's how expertise will be built up. So one of the things that we've done at NIIT is expand the typical learning cycle from learn, practice to these crucial next 3 steps. And a lot of people even get the apply part of it. But the problem is people learn when they make mistakes, the mistake gets recognized, and then they learn how to fix the mistake. And that doesn't happen without the review and the refactor. And this is often very labor intensive. And when you're trying to create a scalable technology-based platform, one of the things that you don't want to have is something that is labor intensive in it. And that's what happened with the MOOCs. So you want to, in quotes, train millions of people, but actually what they have degenerated to is knowledge dissemination. Don't get me wrong, there's nothing wrong with that. There's a very important role that knowledge dissemination does, but knowledge is not equal to skill. And true skill will not come if there's no feedback, if there's no figuring out that you've made the mistakes that you're likely to make in the real world. So, one tip. If you're going to turn right at a red light, there is a tendency, and you'll notice this in India, that people will already angle their car so that they're about to turn right. Why is that a bad idea? Because if somebody hits you from behind, your car is going to be propelled in the direction of oncoming traffic. So please keep your car straight and apply the handbrakes so that you will not be inadvertently pushed into oncoming traffic. Now that's a rookie mistake. How many driving schools do you think teach that? So you can very systematically figure out by talking to experts what are the typical mistakes people make, and one of the things to checklist your program against is, am I giving opportunity to my learners to make those mistakes in a safe way and then understand how not to make them. So just in summary, I created this table, and this is an example of Gen AI in action, but it took me a while to get here after much interaction to correlate between the stage of the learning process. Typical cycle is new knowledge is presented, you try and attempt integration with prior knowledge, then you give an opportunity to practice and apply, then you give feedback and time to reflect, you help the learner consolidate, and then unguided in new situations. Now, what is interesting over here, sorry. So what I've tried to do over here is to correlate what are the cognitive processes that are going on at that stage of the learning process. What are some pedagogical strategies that you can adopt to reinforce or support that cognitive process, and why that would be effective? And then give you options of where technology can support in the execution or implementation of that idea. So I'm trying to correlate the science and theory with practical ways of implementing it. And therefore, what is the technological challenge that is being?
So do you mind if we take a picture of this?
I'll share this presentation. So this is with everything. So this is so far so good. But even knowing this, it's very difficult to implement. So then I said, okay, what will Gen AI enable us to do? Now, after doing all this work is where Gen AI comes into the picture. If you jump into Gen AI, you might intuitively get some things right from personal experience. But I said, let's follow a very systematic approach to really understand where Gen AI can make a difference. And this, then I arrived at this distilled knowledge. So same stage, what can Gen AI help us to do? So encounter with new information, Gen AI driven interactive content that dynamically adapts to learners' interactions. Otherwise, we typically tend to create a little bit of content which remains static across thousands of learners that we may be able to deal with. So traditional content is static. Gen AI offers personalized, engaging content that evolves in real time. Why? Because it can respond, and each learner will get a slightly different variation. And as the systems you design are able to capture some background information about the learner and who the learner is and where they are coming from, your system will be able to present to them information that is more meaningful. So, what is the big problem that I'm trying to solve? Personalization at scale. That's one of the things that we always want, but it's very difficult to execute with static content, and it's very difficult to scale with human beings. But we can do personalization at scale by application of Gen AI. Integration with prior knowledge. Can I assess you and figure out that you already know 3 out of the 10 things? Why do I force you to go through those 3? Why? Because one of the things I'm promising to you is I'll help you learn faster, which means I'm not going to waste your time. Again, very difficult to do through traditional assessment means and traditional instructor-led or instructor-supported mechanisms. So you can do deep personalization. Practice and application. Here the difficult problem is targeted improvement. Otherwise, what does the teacher come and do? Okay guys, I saw your submissions, and by the way, Sagar, this is the mistake I detected in your case, and Vikram, here's the mistake I detected on you, and the other 36 are waiting to get some personalized feedback, but you don't have the time to give that personalized feedback. So imagine an instructor who has a co-instructor who's a Gen AI enabled assistant. That Gen AI assistant can give, personalized feedback to everyone. Which also means that, people are motivated to perform. You can do gamification on that. You can do grading. You can do all kinds of other things. Nobody wants to be seen at the bottom of the list. Feedback and reflection, timely and relevant feedback. What's the point of giving an exam in the early part of the semester and getting the question papers, the scripts answered, 30 days later or 20 days later, by which time you've started learning new things? Can the feedback be in situ, right at the time you're doing something? Point out the error while it's fresh in your mind and get you to correct it in real time. Very difficult to do unless you have a live instructor who's watching right over your shoulder. It's been done. I mean, in our machine rooms in NIIT, even 30 years ago, we had a machine room facilitator who would do that. But even they would have to walk from one, station to another, and their time was limited. Application to new contexts. One of the big counter of Gen AI is that, remember, Gen AI will be available to all the learners also, which means the big problem that we are dealing with is plagiarism. And beyond a point, I think the conversation will shift to, is it really plagiarism, or is it inspiration or whatever it is? But I'm saying, at least, can you explain the solution? You may have copied it. Okay, you didn't put in the hard R's. But there's a difference between copying it and not knowing it, and copying it and at least being able to explain what that solution is. So, I created...
You're running out of
Time. All right. So I'm going to skip this, but basically the thing was that all of those 6, 7, learning science and cognitive insights that I have, we've tried to put it together into a structured framework and architecture for designing learning programs that produce, deep skills, which lead to performance that can be expected and, promised at the workplace. I want to close by, let's see if I can show you something in action. Just one example. Let's see if we can do this. So let me first just unfurl the whole thing. So this is a way that we break down a large program into something that we call learning sprints. And the idea of a learning sprint is that it represents something like 4 to 8 hours of learning. You learn one concept, how to do one task at a time, get a sense of satisfaction before you move ahead. So a long journey, which might be 100 hours or 400 hours, gets broken down into sprints. And at the end of each sprint, you get feedback, you get a sense of accomplishment. And we've broken it down into a certain process that the learners go through. It's very learner-centric. There's no instructor over here, though and we call them mentors, have an important role to play. And what we are looking at is that what are the hard things in this which are people-intensive, and how can Gen AI support that? So pre-reading to help you, figure out why am I learning this, what is the context, etc. When you do practice assignments, you submit them, can you get some feedback immediately? And can we make sure everybody's assignment is reviewed, and not cursorily, but in depth. And then we've created a new thing, and let me see if I can show you that, which is a debrief, where the learner comes live. He has or she has to record a video and explain the solution, and they're given limited amount of time for it. And then it gets submitted and reviewed by the Gen AI. So that's an example of, even if they may have copied or borrowed things, etc., but at least can they explain it, because that's exactly the situation they're going to face, at the time of the interview, etc. So let's just, in closing, see if we can play one of these.
Debriefing stands as a pivotal step in our learning, wherein learners articulate completed tasks or challenges. Its core objective is to evaluate comprehension, address encountered hurdles, and highlight acquired insights. In this process, Gen AI steps in, replacing the conventional mentor to facilitate and enhance the debriefing experience. Let's see how a learner can provide a debrief for a completed assignment. On the My Submissions page, click on the debrief button of the assignment for which debriefing must be done. Clear instructions are provided to the learner regarding the debriefing process. The learner has 1 minute to read the questions and 3 minutes to provide answers. Once the learner initiates the debrief process by clicking on the Start button, the environment is set up. The 1 minute timer for reading the questions is automatically set off. Gen AI extracts a portion of the solution from the learner's submission and generates questions based on it. The questions are generated dynamically. The output of this code snippet is John Doe, which is the first name and the last name provided in the variables. We can modify the code to include a space between the first name and the last name by introducing a space within quotes when printing the first name and the last name.
Now, this question was picked up based on the submission.
And Gen AI evaluates the response and sends a feedback back to the learner. In this stream, the learners answer the debrief questions as well as the feedback that has come from Gen AI are available for the learner.
Now, notice in this speech to text is incorporated.
The learner can attempt to re-record up to 3 times. The already recorded video can also be viewed by the learner by clicking on the video button available on the screen.
Okay, so in the interest of time, I'll pause over here, and if we have some questions, I'd love to address those. But this is an example. Sorry?
I'm sure you raised a million questions.
So, but what I wanted to say is that there's a very specific reason that we wanted to use Gen AI over here. Just over here. The Gen AI is reading in whatever form of English or code the answer that has been submitted. This happens to be a technical program. It could very well have been, in fact, I have one where we're teaching people English communication skills. So it reads the answer, then from that answer, it picks up something and quizzes the learner on that, saying, now in real time, explain to me what this is doing. And then it's converting that speech into text, analyzing it, and giving feedback. And we've also noticed that if you get it right, it will not only say, yeah, you got it right, it will give you some additional points of view of how you can improve, or you might want to consider this. And of course, if you don't get it right, it will flag it off as right and says this needs to be redone. This is happening in less than 60 seconds. So you can imagine, again, the promise of not wasting the learner's time. Otherwise, I have to wait, then tomorrow maybe somebody will review it, then the feedback will come to me, but tomorrow I have a new learning plan, so I create a backlog. All this is happening right there and then at the convenience. This is just one example, but these are the kind of use cases that I would encourage you to examine in the context of Gen AI, rather than Gen AI as a technology. You figured out why you've adopted a certain learning process. It can be certainly improved. Now figure out how you can take it to the next level with Gen AI. And as Gen AI improves, you might be able to completely reimagine the learning process itself. Because right now it's responding in text. Tomorrow it could respond by saying, okay, here is an example of how to do it right. And actually show you a video that is got generated on the fly. All right. I hope this session was useful and gives you food for thought.
So I don't have a question. There is maybe one more thing that I could add on to this was when it comes to feedback. Mocha did that manually for 2 years. And when generative AI, when the whole wave came, it was very easy for us to adopt because we had done that manually day in and day out for 2 years. So we knew how exactly to adopt and what factors to include, what not to include. Right. So actually I would encourage people to first do it manually if they can, and then look at a Gen AI.
That's what happened with us. I mean, we wanted to do that, and because that
examples are the material.
yeah. And see, we could then compare, like right now we have about 90% plus accuracy rates, but that's not good enough, right? We really want to get perfect answers because so everything that this thing is churning out, we are still reviewing it, human feedback, there's a quality check going on until we get to rates where we are comfortable that we're not doing a disservice to the learner because they could, if the answer is wrong. All right. Okay. Thank you.